Okay, today we are going to discuss what is virtualization and why do we do it. So virtualization can be very complex and intricate, but at a high level, it doesn't need to be. In simple basic terms, it's getting an application to fake physical hardware for an operating system to be installed on top of, or software that represents hardware. And this allows you to install another operating system on that virtualized or faked hardware, like running Linux inside of Windows, or running Windows in a Mac, like Catalina. Not side-by-side dual boot. We can be in our Catalina Mac OS or inside of our Windows OS and have access through the operating system to a virtual machine that is running Windows or Linux. We can even run Windows inside of our Windows operating system. Even for the most advanced enterprise solutions, this is still true, but at a much more advanced degree. For me, my preferred hypervisor is called VMware Workstation, and there are plenty out there. There is Workstation, it runs on Windows and Linux. The Pro version that I use is paid, but there is a free version called Workstation Player, although it does have some limitations, such as only being able to run one VM at a time, and it doesn't have the ability to take snapshots. There's Hyper-V, which is an excellent solution from Microsoft. It's baked into the operating system and is usually free depending on the version of Windows that you're running. It does come with Windows 10 Pro, Windows 10 Enterprise, and Windows 10 Education version, but the home version, it won't be included. It is also included in all server versions. You just have to install the service. Then there is VirtualBox. That is a free solution, and it is multi-platform. It will run on Windows and Linux, and I believe there is a Mac version as well. And the advantage to that is you can take a VirtualBox VM between different operating systems. You just have to install VirtualBox and take your VM with you, and then you'd be able to run that VM on Linux, Windows, or Mac. And then there's VMware Fusion or Parallels. Those are specifically for the Mac and run virtual machines on your Mac OS. All of these that I've mentioned are type 2 hypervisors. They are basically just an application that runs in your OS to simulate or virtualize physical hardware. Now, I said hypervisor, and this is what we call the application that handles virtualizing the hardware for your virtualized operating system, like the CPU, memory, and storage. Because, for instance, Windows needs to see a hard drive to install onto, and a CPU and memory in order to run. And when it is running inside another operating system like Windows, it can't directly access that hardware. So the hypervisor fakes or virtualizes that hardware and presents it to the operating system that you are running inside that virtual machine. And it handles what needs to be done to pass the instructions onto the actual hardware or to your operating system that the hypervisor is running on. Then there's the big guns, like VMware ESXi. That is a type 1 hypervisor. Basically, it's an operating system that is the virtualization software, and the hypervisor runs directly on the physical machine. ESXi is its own operating system that is the hypervisor, just like Windows or Linux is, except this one is dedicated to virtualizing other operating systems very efficiently. So, for instance, let's create a virtual machine with no operating system on it inside my Windows here. We're going to use the hypervisor Hyper-V that comes with Windows. So let's take a look at how to do that. So if we go to Start and we type in Hyper-V, we see that we don't have any applications here, but it gives us a suggestion to turn a feature on or off. So let's click on that, and we'll see here that we have the option to enable Hyper-V. Check that box and click OK. Let the installation run, and then we will need to reboot. Once we reboot, we will have access to the Hyper-V manager. So let's go ahead and restart now. So now that we're signed back into Windows, we can go ahead and we can type in Hyper-V again. And we can see here we have access to the Hyper-V manager. Okay, and we can see our interface here. We have some options over on the right-hand side. So the first option, to create a VM, we will select a new virtual machine. Okay, I don't really read this stuff, but we'll go next and we'll select a name for our VM. We're going to change the location. I'm not a fan of this location. I like to go into our documents and create a virtual machines folder here. And that's the folder we'll select. So for the hardware, we will select generation 2. We would like to have UEFI based firmware and support for 64-bit operating systems. I don't need 32-bit operating system support at this time for this VM. Okay, we'll specify how much memory we have. We'll do 4 GB, should be plenty for just this demo VM. For the network, default switch is fine. Our hard disk, so this is where we're going to specify how large the virtual hard drive is. We're going to go with 40 GB, and this is where it's going to be stored. So there's some extra options here. Let's say you have multiple virtual machines and you have one powered on and you like to access the disk of another one. And instead of powering on that other one, you can just attach the disk from that other virtual machine and it would pop up in your virtual machine that you're running and you'd be able to get the data off of it. But we don't need that option now, so we'll go to next. And we can choose an ISO. We don't have one right now. We will download one. So we'll just select install an operating system later. And we'll say finish. And there's our virtual machine. Okay, its state is currently off. We can right click on it and we can say connect, and this screen here is kind of like our virtual monitor. This is the display for it. So we can click on start, or we can click on the power button up here. They both do the same thing. And just like a normal machine, it tries to start up and gives us a black BIOS screen. So because we don't have any operating system installed on the virtual hard drive, there's no operating system to boot into. So let's power it off and let's specify an ISO file that we can use to install Windows into this virtual machine. So instead of using shutdown, because there's no operating system in here, it wouldn't be able to shut down. So we get a message, no operating system could be detected or loaded. So Microsoft gives you this after a minute or so of trying network boot. So let's turn this off. And let's find a ISO to install Windows. So to configure our virtual machine with an ISO to install Windows, we have to go to the settings. We'll go down to our SCSI controller and we're going to add a DVD drive. Okay, so SCSI controller, now we have a DVD drive, and in the DVD drive, we can now specify an image file. We'll go to our downloads and select our Windows 10 ISO that we've downloaded. I have a video from last week about how to download this ISO file directly from Microsoft.com, so go ahead and check that out. It'll be in the card at the top right. So we'll go ahead and apply, so we can see our DVD drive is using this .iso file. So now we have a ISO selected, and before we boot, we can see here that the firmware is set to boot from the hard drive and then from the network adapter. So we want to move the DVD drive up to the top so that it boots from there first. Actually, we can leave it at second. It'll try from the hard drive and then it will try the DVD drive, then it will try the network adapter. So let's move our DVD drive into the second position just after hard drive. Hit apply, hit OK, and now we should be able to power on our virtual machine. So we saw a message there to hit enter or hit any key to boot from the CD or DVD drive. And here we go. We can run an installation of Windows. Let's go through this and get a Windows install done. Okay, so now that we've set our hard drive or virtual hard disk as the first boot device, Once it reboots from installing from the .iso file, it will boot directly into Windows and get everything set up. So let it run and set up, and we will get into Windows. Okay, and just like that, we are running our own virtual machine. And it's a brand new installation of Windows. Okay, and it's just like any other Windows. So what are we really doing? What we're actually doing is virtualizing the physical hardware for Windows to run on. So just like a physical machine, Windows needs some sort of drivers to interact best with the hardware. Now, Hyper-V does this with Hyper-V integration services. It's not really very transparent. VMware does this with VMware Tools. It's an application that gets installed, and it allows the operating system to really well integrate and operate on the virtualized hardware. Now, for the why of virtualization. For me, it's about running multiple operating systems without the need for multiple pieces of hardware. I like to install different versions of Linux and different versions of Windows and see what they can do and see what updates there are and see what new features have come out. The other big reason for me is snapshots. If I want to install an application I'm not too sure about, or a Windows update, for instance, that I might not like, or maybe it causes some issues, or the software I install causes issues, within just a couple clicks, I can go back to a point in time on my virtual machine like it never happened. This is great for testing software or doing demos that you need to repeat many times. I use snapshots a ton when making videos to check out new features or how software will install and what the steps are to install it without the worry of uninstalling it later on. I can install it, take notes, and roll back my snapshot. Within a minute, my virtual machine is back to the state that I took the snapshot in. I also like to test out new operating systems like the latest releases of Ubuntu or TrueNAS. For instance, I'll install a TrueNAS update before I do it in any of my production systems. This is one of the reasons I'm skipping the TrueNAS version of 12.0U4. I installed it on my TrueNAS VM and noticed that the dashboard was missing some components, specifically the CPU bar graph. So I skipped that update, knowing that it would cause a dashboard issue in my production systems before installing it. Now, TrueNAS will likely fix that in the next release, and when they do release it, I'll update it on my TrueNAS virtual machine, see if it's fixed, and then I will test it out. And if all those tests go well, I'll install the update to my production systems. And one of the biggest reasons for virtualization is simply to make use of very powerful hardware. Imagine buying a very expensive server with a terabyte of memory, 96 CPU cores, and 200 terabytes of NVMe storage, then installing a Linux OS web server on it. Well, it's not likely that your web server is going to be making use of all that hardware. So with virtualization, you can install a Windows server with Microsoft SQL on it, and maybe another Linux OS with Docker to run containers. Maybe you want another Windows 10 VM to test your web server on. You can install on a machine like that, you can install 40 or 50 or 60 virtual machines, depending on how big you want them. Say you get another team of users and you don't want to share your Windows SQL server. They'll need a separate one because they're private or there's security issues. And you can install, a separate email server, a separate file server for different teams. And they'll all be separated on different networks if you'd like. You can slice up this very expensive server into many smaller and appropriately sized machines and a variety of different operating systems until your physical server is being utilized to a point where you're getting your money's worth, basically. So I mentioned snapshots, so let's take a look at how we can use a snapshot in Hyper-V, which Hyper-V calls them checkpoints. So there's an option here, or we can go to the action menu and select checkpoint or hit Control N. What do we want to name this? Fresh install. And we saw down here at the bottom that the checkpoint succeeded. Okay, so if we want to take a look at our checkpoints, we can go down here and we can see in the bottom portion here, we select our virtual machine and we have our checkpoints. So here's the checkpoint. It was created at 257, generation 2, and the details about that. So what exactly can we do with a checkpoint? Let's install some software. Let's do let's get something sketchy. We'll just click, we'll pick on one of these ones. Okay, so I don't know what this software does. Well, it looks like it's a video converter, but I don't know if it has viruses or malware or something like that in there. But we're going to install it. Okay, so now we have our software installed, our questionable software. And maybe let's do some registry editing. We'll just delete some stuff out of here. Really go for it. Oh, and it looks like we've done something. Oh, maybe not. It's having a hard time. So it looks like we might have caused some trouble. Let's try and restart. So it doesn't look like our restart button was working. And look at that. We did enough damage that Windows needs to go into diagnosing your PC. So good thing we took a snapshot before we were messing around with our registry. Okay, our PC didn't boot properly. So instead of trying to troubleshoot this and go to advanced options and running the repair, let's just revert to our fresh install. So we can select revert, or we can go down here and into the options. So let's just revert because this will go to the most recent snapshot that we've taken. So click on revert. It says reverting changes and revert succeeded. And we're back into Windows. Our software is gone that we installed and the registry is fixed. It's back to where it was when we took the snapshot. So one of the most remarkable things about this whole thing here is all of this installation of Hyper-V, running this virtual machine inside of Hyper-V, well, this was all done inside of a virtual machine. This Hyper-V virtual machine is running inside of a virtual machine on my desktop. So you can see here, these are my virtual machines running in VMware Workstation. This is my Windows, and this is my Hyper-V running inside of Windows. So I have a nested virtual machine of Hyper-V. And this was just for a demo, so I don't need to have this virtual machine. And instead of going through uninstalling it and uninstalling these Windows updates that happened, I'm going to revert this virtual machine to previous of the Hyper-V install. So before I installed Hyper-V, I took a snapshot. We'll select Go To. And this just goes to show how powerful virtual machines can be. So we're back into my Windows OS. And Hyper-V is no longer there. We'd have to reinstall it. And for this Windows update, before I did the Windows update, I took a snapshot. So we are here in this point in time. If I want to go to a point in time before the Hyper-V install and before this Windows update was installed, I can do that. And it only takes about 30 seconds. So now my Windows install is at a point in time before that update was applied. We can see here that it's waiting to install it. And if I reboot this machine right now, it will install that version of Windows. And even more advanced in Workstation, we can go back, well, forward in time to when the installation of the Windows update was there. You can see here that we are in this snapshot. If we want to go to a snapshot that was taken after this one, we can go to it. If we load this one, our Windows will have been updated with the new update. Let's try it. And there we go. Our Windows update was installed, but we never ran the install because we went to a snapshot to a point in time where it was installed. So I hope this video has helped you gain some confidence in maybe running a virtual machine. Maybe you have a version of Windows 10 that you can install Hyper-V on, and you can try out some new flavors of different operating systems like Linux or different versions of Windows, or maybe install that sketchy software and get done what you need to get done with that software and revert back to a snapshot without having to mess up your primary Windows install on your machine. That's mostly what I use this for. So I hope this has helped you get some tech things done. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.